No matter what your family looks like, whether your kids are old or young, Studio 5 parenting contributor Heather Johnson believes there is one parenting style that can work for all, and that is faith-based parenting. She says it's not just about teaching doctrine per se, it's about letting your spiritual beliefs shape your relationships with your kids. From decision-making to how we love and discipline our children, a faith-based parent is an intentional parent. Heather joins me to explain. I am so eager to hear what you have to say on this. And you want to make it clear that faith-based is also value-based, so regardless of your religious affiliation or not, this applies.
Absolutely, and we want to make that really clear, right? When we talk about faith-based parenting, it is true. It is taking values and principles that we subscribe to. They tend to be connected to God, to a higher power, but we allow those values and principles to shape who we are as parents, to shape how we discipline, how we love, how we structure our homes, how we work together. Now, it doesn't have to be, and what I mean by that is these values are values regardless of if you connect them to a higher power or not. Forgiveness, humility, love, patience, compassion, they exist regardless of religion, regardless. And so we want to keep that in mind. But we also know that the benefits that come from structuring our home in these faith-based ways or Christian principled ways, they benefit us. They connect us. They do unbelievable things for us.
The research shows that.
The research continues to show that, right? We've got a lot of benefits. We've got things like stronger family bonds naturally come together. When we're in a home where we're teaching forgiveness and love and empathy, naturally we come closer together, right? When we're in a home where there is an emphasis on the principles you need in order to deal with conflict, like managing your emotions and forgiving one another, these are faith-based principles. And so now we're able to better handle conflict resolution or conflict management in our home. The benefits just keep coming. There's an ethical component that happens when we teach not to judge, when we teach compassion, when we teach loving each other. Well, then all of a sudden, ethically, we're able to make moral decisions that benefit and support each other in better ways, right? So do you see, it's those values and principles, again, call them whatever you want.
We all subscribe to them.
Absolutely, and they are founded in our faith. They're founded in what my husband and I believe to be important, and that then structures and governs how we run our household.
I will say I appreciate the all-encompassing umbrella, that's encircling this conversation, and it does apply, as you've defined it, to every parent, every household. There are a few Instagram accounts popping up, however, that really connect the nuance of faith, religion, and parenting, and it's a cool study.
It is.
It's a cool study to see how they're synchronized. But for the sake of today's conversation, faith-based, value-based, I find myself thinking as you were explaining that definition to kind of construct our conversation, home is where it's practiced. Like oftentimes if I can't justify a why to my kids, it's because this is where we practice what I want you to do out there. And you can't, as I say, intentional parenting, you can't just expect that to happen, right?
It doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
We have to be, remember, being intentional about faith-based, any based parenting, value-based, means that we have a working plan. It means that we have a working plan and are putting energy and effort into making those things happen. That means they have to be on our mind. That's why faith-based parenting is so powerful, because it means that it is structuring everything that we're doing, right? It is forming and governing how I go about interacting, communicating, the rules that we have, the rules that we don't have. That's going to come from that faith-based parenting, from those values we subscribe to.
You mentioned resilience, emotional resilience. Can you connect that and correlate that for us? How does that play out?
Yeah, again, as we're dealing with our kids, when we are teaching not just the skill of resilience, but when we're teaching them the values and principles of not judging, of working together, of being compassionate, when we're then teaching them to found what they do every day on those everyday practices. This could be, if we go a little bit more religious, things like prayer, things like us communicating and working together about those values. It teaches them to make their own decisions, to be resilient when things outside them get challenged. Remember too, it creates a unity, and that's where the resilience comes from, is that when we share those values in our home, we're unified.
Strength in numbers.
And it's in the unity that we then have resilience towards those things outside our home that challenge us.
It's a good case, Heather.
And
it's a good case.
And it builds that connection.
You just made a good case. Faith-based parenting lends itself to some challenges as well. And there are some things that you want parents to be aware of and perhaps work to overcome so that we can capitalize on all of the beautiful benefits that you just outlined. The first is this potential for rigid thinking.
It's really easy with faith-based parenting to put our kids, our teenagers, ourselves in a position where we don't often hear other perspectives or ideas. And so we can become very rigid in our thinking, right? We don't want that for our kids. The situation puts them in a place where it's hard for them to accept others. It's hard for them to work with others. And so some things that we can do is we want to make sure that we help our kids understand that other people's perspectives don't have to challenge ours. When it comes to thinking, you can think one way, I can think another way. Our home can be, for example, faith-based or work on certain values and principles. If someone else doesn't feel that way, it doesn't have to challenge what we're thinking or believing in.
Which is tricky because sometimes even those same values play out in different ways.
They do.
In different families and households.
They absolutely do, which is why then we go a couple steps further and teach more of those values, which are to love everyone.
Sure.
And to love one another and to not judge.
I roll up my sleeves and work on this every day. I have a child who was born into this world, very black and white thinker.
Yeah.
She is a black and white thinker. And it's been interesting to watch that because it's not something she like learned per se, but it's in her. And so to talk through that has been a real, I'll say parenting challenge, parenting blessing, but we're constantly dialoguing that in our house, that open-mindedness and that acceptance that you talked about.
And the ability to be open-minded and accept and not judge and love everyone, and also, again, not allow it to challenge that your black and white thinking is still yours.
Yeah, don't apologize for how you feel or what you think.
You can hang on to that and also see other perspectives. They don't have to challenge one another, but we have to teach them that, right? It's so interesting because we talk about this faith-based parenting and how it is universal and intentional. And at the same time, some of these problems that we're talking about running into, we don't run into them if we continue to teach faith-based parenting.
If it's ongoing.
It's exactly right, meaning not judging and loving one another. That's faith-based parenting. It's only when I'm not doing that that then all of a sudden we might run into rigid thinking problems.
Isn't that interesting?
Does that make sense? So we're talking about living these values.
One trips the other.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And making sure that if we stay true to them, then we don't actually run into these same problems the way we might think we will.
Isn't that fascinating?
Right? So they can hurt each other or help each other that way.
I hadn't thought of it like that, but it makes sense. Social adaptation, that can present some challenges to this type of thinking or parenting.
Again, there's a hindrance to other perspectives. We can tend to be really sheltered. If we have a lot of faith-based parenting going on, it's our ideas and we'll do it in our home and we're going to stay here and we shelter our kids from having other social experiences. We keep them from those experiences. Lots of times we do it because we're afraid that if they get introduced to something else, they're not going to stick with our faith-based parenting.
Say, at the root of that good intended practice is fear, right?
It's exactly right. There's fear. And so what can we do? Well, we want to teach them critical thinking skills. We want to teach them to be able to think for themselves, make their decisions for themselves, because faith-based parenting can also lead them to worry so much about the obedience piece, which we want them to, but to worry so much about that they don't develop the critical thinking skills. They just do it because they are told they have to do it. We want them to learn to think and then choose the obedience, right? And so we want to make sure we do that. We can also help with this one by teaching them to be in the world but not of it, which I love this principle for everything from cell phones and video games to time with your friends. How do we teach our kids to be in the world and have societal experiences with people who might choose different than they do and them not choose it themselves?
How do we?
Right?
What's
another segment?
What's the answer?
Right? It's that capacity to attend, maybe it's the high school party, but not maybe choose everything that's going on there. It's being able to hear a new idea and not allow it to sway what you've already come to know. It's recognizing that cell phones and technology are a part of our lives, and yet having the discipline to choose not to have it overtake our lives. That's being in it, but not of it. We want that dialogue to be going on in our homes all the time. That's faith-based parenting. And it helps them choose or not be challenged in those societal adaptations so that they've got to be able to leave our house and function in society, right? And that's what we're talking about here. That can be really hard when we keep them too sheltered.
And clearly we needed a part 2 to this conversation because we have 30 seconds left. But talk to me about pressure and guilt. This shows up, I imagine, a lot in your practice.
It does. There's a lot of pressure and guilt that we feel coming from a faith-based home that we're not meeting those religious expectations. And that shuts kids and teenagers down. They don't know what to do with that. It's really hard. As parents, a couple things we can do is we want to make sure that we don't tie their worth to their performance. We have to work really hard to make sure that they understand that regardless of what they choose or don't choose, what they accomplish or don't accomplish, it will never, ever challenge their worth.
And isn't it interesting, and I'll insert the word maybe sad, that we hear that and we apply that to like schoolwork or performance on the soccer field. But but you're performing that, you're attaching that to personal performance.
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
And we do that often. One of the ways that we tend to do that is the way we handle those situations where we withhold love, and now our kids go, well, I didn't do this right, and so as a result, my mom withheld that love. The other thing that's so important for us to do as parents to help combat this guilt and pressure is to make sure that we do not parent out of fear, which means we don't pit together or teach our children to live faith-based, live value-based so that they don't get punished. And we do that often. We also function out of fear when we teach them that if they don't make certain choices, that a higher power will not love them anymore, or neither will we. Those are things we can do as parents. And again, remember, if we continue to live those values and principles, the faith-based parenting, it will help eradicate these things that come up as pitfalls and struggles if we continue to live those values.
It's a beautiful
They
full
matter.
circle. Beautiful full circle. Thank you for teaching us in that way, Heather. We appreciate it. You can find Heather's contact information on our website.